Welcome to this edition of Scientists in Action, T-Rex to Turkey, brought to you by the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science respectfully acknowledges that the land we are on today is the traditional homeland of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and people. We also acknowledge that the state of Colorado includes the ancestral homelands of 48 Native American tribal nations who now reside in the Southwest, the Great Plains, and the Rocky Mountain region. Thank you. And hello to our scientists. Hello to everyone out there on the other side of the camera, tuning in with your cameras and computers. I am super excited to meet some of y'all that will be joining us on camera. For those schools that will be appearing on camera, we ask that for the time being, you keep your microphones and cameras shut off, and then we'll touch base again when we get to the Q&A. But for now, I can't wait to introduce our scientists. We have Drs. Garth Spellman and Emily Lessner. So Dr. Garth, could you set the scene and tell us about where we are, who you are, and what is the cool science that you're up to?
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. We got to see a couple of the classrooms when you're sound checking, and we're really excited to have you with us today. We are at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is close to downtown Denver in City Park. And right now we are 63 feet below the surface of that park in our collections range, and we are in zoology collections today. And so the animals you see behind us are scientific specimens and taxidermied specimens that sometimes are on display at the museum, but many of them are used for scientific research. So, and I am Garth Spellman. I am the curator of ornithology here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I am an evolutionary geneticist. I use bird DNA to learn about their evolutionary history. And joining to me today is Dr. Emily Lessner.
Hello, I'm Emily. I am a paleontology researcher at the museum here, and I study reptiles, both present and past, and dinosaurs and birds, and I use clues that the fossils can tell us to learn about how these animals lived in their ancient habitats.
And so we are going to dive right in, and we're going to talk about T-Rex to Turkey and how we know that birds are living dinosaurs. And so behind us, we've got our T-Rex, and it does look like it's going to eat our turkey in the back, which is kind of appropriate since we're coming up on Thanksgiving. But before we get going, we want to start with our first poll question for you. So hopefully we can bring that up on screen, and we have a question for you. So how big is the smallest dinosaur? The size of a bee, the size of a chicken, or the size of a turkey? Please enter your responses in there, and we'll see what the return is.
The tension is killing me.
Do we have the results? All right, so well, the size of a chicken came back as the #1 choice. Well, for those of you who said the size of a bee, you were actually correct. So birds are the only surviving lineage of dinosaurs that survived a mass extinction around 65 million years ago. And so the bird I am holding in my hand right now is a calliope hummingbird. This is the smallest hummingbird we have here in Colorado, but the smallest living bird is a bee hummingbird, which lives on the island of Cuba, and it weighs about 2 grams. This calliope hummingbird weighs about 0.5 gram more than that. So the smallest dinosaur is actually among us and living with us today on the planet in hummingbirds. And so we are going to talk to you today about how we know that birds and dinosaurs are connected? Oh, go ahead.
All right, I'll start off with one of our first features. When scientists were trying to figure out what dinosaurs were and what birds were and how they related, one of the first things that cued them in was this idea that their bones were hollow. So what I have right here with me is pretty heavy. This is an Allosaurus tibia. So that's this bone right here in you, your shin bone. And what you can see here is this space is a hollow cavity in the middle of the bone. And what happens in this fossil is that while it was being fossilized and turned to rock, it filled up with some minerals. So I can't actually stick my hand in there right now, but this bone is a hollow bone. And that was one of the first things that cued researchers in to the relationship between birds and dinosaurs.
And so we see that feature in modern bird skeletons as well. So you can see this right here. So this is the same bone that you find in an Andean condor. You can see how hollow it is. So this is a bird that flies around quite a bit. And then on the inside, if your fingers were small enough, you could stick your finger inside there. And then at the end, you can see these struts, the pieces of bone that sort of go between those layers and that hollow layer of bone. And so that's how we know we've got the hollow bones, so of those ancient dinosaurs and the hollow bones of modern birds that we see. So they share those characters.
All right, another thing when we think about birds, and you think about their mouths and what they're eating is beaks. So we do have some dinosaurs like these ceratopsians back here that have beaks, but then they also have teeth in their mouths. So these animals are a little furtherly related than birds, but we do have some examples of dinosaurs like this oviraptor that doesn't have any teeth. It just has a beak. So here's its head up here. And there's its little mouth. If you look closely, it looks kind of like the beak of a parrot.
And so, of course, we have a parrot here, and we can kind of see how that looks similar. But bird bills have, of course, evolved to, right, be closely associated with their diet. So with this parrot that you see right here, it's got that nice hooked bill that you would see with an oviraptor. So, and parrots actually have very, very mobile tongues, and they're able to move their skulls as well to manipulate their bills. And so you see a lot of evolution that has occurred since dinosaur bills to modern birds.
This oviraptor also has a pretty cool feature on it that lets us know that birds and dinosaurs are one and the same. So if you touch up here on your shoulder, you'll feel your clavicle or your collarbone. And if you look on the chest of this dinosaur right here, that same bone is right here, but it's fused into one bone that's known as the furcula. And you may recognize this in birds. It's something that's kind of common.
Yes. So if any of you have had turkey for Thanksgiving dinner, you would actually see a bone that looks like this. And in many families, at least in mine, it was a tradition to dry it out and break it. So with one of your brothers to see who got the larger piece. So, and that's the wishbone, that furculum. And so on a turkey, if I were to show you, it would look very, very similar to what you see in that oviraptor. That bone actually sits right here on the turkey, and it's that fused, so clavicle, that furculum is the wishbone. And it looks very different in different bird species. So this is from an Andean condor, looks actually more similar to what you see in that oviraptor right there. So that really pronounced U shape, and then doesn't have this part coming off the end that you see in the turkey. So you see a huge diversity in this bone in modern birds, including some bird skeletons where you actually have even more fusion, where that furculum, that wishbone, is actually fused to the sternum on a bird. So that would be your breastbone that you can tap right on your chest. So that's another feature that we know that unites birds and dinosaurs. What else we got?
This is a fun one. This is a really special fossil. And it's something that you might think of more when you think of birds. But we do know that dinosaurs had them too. So this is a small rock. And if you look really closely right here, this is a fossilized feather. So this one's actually found from the Cretaceous period, which is before the asteroid that got rid of the large-bodied dinosaurs hit, which means that this animal, this bird, was living at the same time as our big dinosaurs, our ceratopsians and tyrannosaurs. And these fossils are pretty rare because feathers are quite fragile.
And of course, with modern birds, we can actually see what those feathers may have looked like. So this is a resplendent quetzal. And you can see just how beautiful the color is on those feathers on these animals that are covered in them. And what is pretty amazing is scientists have even been able to study old fossilized dinosaur feathers. And they can see, if you look at the microstructure under a microscope on those feathers, how pigments are actually stacked within those. And so we can get a good idea about patterns of colors that dinosaurs may have exhibited, and also the colors they may have produced by how pigments are found in those feathers in the fossils. And so we know that at the time of the dinosaurs, there were animals that were feathered that probably had this beautiful iridescent sheen as well that you see on this beautiful resplendent quetzal. So they all had feathers.
And it's tricky, right? Feathers are very fragile and they're hard to find in the fossil record. So how might we know that some of these past animals had feathers? And the clues to these are actually held in the bones. I don't have a bone for you today, but this is a Velociraptor, and we'll pop an image up on the screen of its ulna. So that's the elbow bone up there. And if you look really closely at the bones of these animals, they have these little spots on them, and these spots are where the feathers would have attached. So in the past, before we noticed these, people would reconstruct these as scaly animals, but it's more likely that they had feathered bodies.
And so those ulnar quill knobs actually can be seen in modern birds. And so that's how we know that these traits are homologous with one another. They're similar. And so this is the ulna of an Andean condor. And actually, you can really see the knobs on this bone. So each one of those dots that you see on there that come up off of the bone, those are attachments for flight feathers in this Andean condor. And so those are secondary feathers. And I can show you on this pelican wing where those feathers are. So the feathers that are attached to the ulna would be these feathers right here that create that airfoil for the wing. And so by being anchored into the bone, it creates this really rigid wing structure that allows for that airfoil to be created. And it's one of those adaptations that allows for flight in birds as well. Now, whether or not in dinosaurs it was used for flapping at all, we don't know exactly what that was for, but we're learning more and more every year.
All right, we have one final similarity to share with you, and this one's about how these animals lived and interacted with each other. So we think about an animal like a human. We hang out with each other. We're very social. We exist in large groups like your classrooms, and we have evidence in the fossil record of this too. So here we've got some rocks that are full of fossils from a bone bed of Edmontosaurus. So these are big plant-eating dinosaurs. And if you look at this bone right here and this bone right here, these are the same bone from different animals, and they're backbones. So if you reach your hand up your back, you can feel these guys. And we have two different size classes of them. So that means that there were small animals existing with these large animals, and they all happened to die and were preserved in the same bone bed, which cues us in to that they were living in the same place at the same time in these pretty large groups, just like modern birds.
And so, of course, all of you have seen that with modern birds. You've seen modern birds flock. You probably have seen family groups, even of turkeys, maybe walking through your neighborhoods. And so we know that social aspect is very important to birds, and just as it was to dinosaurs in the past. So, and with that, we would love to take some of your questions.
So we have a question in the chat right off the bat, which is, what bone does the velociraptor have that is connected to a chicken or a turkey?
Ooh.
Some kind of relationship there.
So we did talk about one of those bones, and that was, in fact, the fused clavicle, the furculum. So you might remember. And that is this bone, the wishbone. So that would sit right there on a turkey. And we do know that velociraptors also had a fused clavicle or a furculum. Would have been right there at the top of their chest.
All right. And that first question has broken the seal. More and more questions are coming in now.
Awesome.
So in a moment, we'll get a couple more of these chat questions, and then we'll tune in with our on-camera schools. You talked about dinosaurs having feathers. One question is, how do you know dinosaurs weren't furry? Is that a question still up for debate, or has the book been closed on that one?
So we know that dinosaurs weren't furry because from the fossil record, we find evidence of feathers. So on dinosaurs and non-avian dinosaurs as well. And then these other skeletal features like the quill knobs that we showed you on the ulna that show that feathers anchored to bone were present in dinosaurs as well. We know as well that they weren't furry because hair has actually only been shown to have evolved in a single group. So, and that is mammals. Us. I don't exhibit that very well, but Emily is doing a good job of that.
All right. We'll get one more question from the chat and then tune into our schools. This question is, what dinosaur is the same size as a turkey? So I think we're thinking further back in time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this oviraptor is a good example. So if we compare the size of this guy, he's a little crunched up, but this is one of its leg bones and this is another. So its leg probably would have been about this long, which is pretty similar to that turkey up there. It's got a little bit of a bigger skull, but in general, these oviraptors could have been the same size.
Yep. So birds, though, would be missing that part. So bird tails have been shortened significantly from what you see in a lot of dinosaurs.
All right. Thank you. So now let's tune in with Bridges Elementary. If you would turn on your camera and microphone, and we would love to hear some questions from the kiddos there. So Bridges Elementary, are you there with us?
Okay.
Oh, starting to hear something.
Do any birds have scales?
Sorry, one more time, nice and clearly into the microphone.
Do any birds have scales?
Do any birds have tails? Is that what the question was?
Scales.
Scales.
Oh, absolutely, birds have scales. Let's see here. It might be easy to see on this Andean condor because our camera person can zoom in. And if you can zoom in on the feet of that bird, you can see scales very, very clearly on their feet. You see them?
Yeah.
So birds, all birds have scaly feet. Some birds have feathers that come all the way down to their toes, but underneath those toes are scales. So yes, birds still do retain scaly parts of their body, and that is on their feet.
All right, awesome. Let's get another question from Bridges.
Is it possible that birds can go back to their dinosaur form?
Sorry, one more time. Maybe you could take another step close to the microphone so that we can hear you even better.
Is it possible for birds to go back to their dinosaur form?
Is it possible for birds to go back to their dinosaur form? Ooh.
I love that question. So there is an interesting trend when you look across evolution that once a trait gets lost, it is really hard to get it back. And so birds have lost teeth, right? So you look at their bills, they're very different than the bills that you see of some of these dinosaurs, like the frilled dinosaurs that still have teeth. And so once you lose the ability to make, right, a trait like a tooth, it becomes very, very hard to regain that. But I do want to point a little bit of attention to this giant bird that is actually behind our turkey right here, because that is an ostrich. And so there are many birds, like ostriches, that actually evolved from birds that flew. So you can think of a very ancient ancestor to a bird like an ostrich actually might have looked more like a chicken or a turkey and was able to fly. And so you have, because evolution has taken that bird and its lifestyle meant that it didn't need to fly, and it got bigger and bigger and was able to survive and adapt. So it has gone back to looking very different from what you think of modern birds at your bird feeder. So they're pretty amazing, and you can kind of look at them and you can see those dinosaur-like traits in a bird like an ostrich.
Awesome. All right. Fantastic question. Let's get another from Bridges.
Have you compared dino eggs to bird eggs?
Sorry, one more time. Nice and clear and right into the microphone, please.
Have you compared dino eggs to bird eggs?
Have we compared dino eggs to bird eggs? We absolutely have, and we have some here, and that actually brings us to a really interesting part, because we talked a lot about what makes dinosaurs and birds very similar and how we know they're related, but that can also bring us to talking about what makes them different. And so that question actually leads to one of those traits that makes dinosaurs and birds different.
So I have a cast here. Don't worry, they're not real. Otherwise, I would not hold them this way. But this is a cast of some dinosaur eggs from China. And if you look at them carefully, you might notice that the shape is a little different than bird eggs. But what you also might see is that they come in pairs. So there's two here, two here, two here, and so on. And in modern birds, they only lay single eggs. But in ancestors of these modern birds, some of these dinosaurs, we find that they're laid in pairs, which means that they had two oviducts and two ovaries, which is an ancient feature of these guys.
Yeah, so modern birds, we can see right here. So this is a sparrow nest, and each of the eggs that you can see in here are laid one at a time in modern birds. So you don't get the two paired eggs that you see in dinosaurs. And then another trait that you see in modern birds. So, of course, is this nest building. And so this is, of course, a dinosaur nest. It might be a little bit simple, just built in a dirt excavation where they excavated the dirt out a little bit and they laid their eggs in there. There are modern birds that still have nesting behaviors very similar to what you see in dinosaurs. Some birds just will create an indentation in sand or soft soil and lay their eggs there. But modern birds as well weave these pretty intricate nests. And there is another interesting feature about eggs that you see, or dinosaur eggs, Emily, if you want to talk about that feature on those eggs you have there as well.
Yeah, so the way that stuff from the environment gets through to the eggs is via these pores. You can't necessarily see them on these eggs, but from looking at very closely at the structure of the eggs, we find that the pores on the eggs are only on one surface in the dinosaur eggs, which means that if the eggs were to flip over, they'd essentially be suffocated and then the animals would never be allowed to hatch. And this is different than in our modern birds.
So if we could zoom in on this giant egg that I have here on the table for modern birds. So that right there is an elephant bird egg. This is a bird that actually went extinct about 1,000 years ago, but it was a modern bird native to Madagascar. And if you look across the entire surface of this egg, you see pores are uniformly distributed. That's what every single one of these little dots is on that egg. Those pores allow for gas exchange and allow for the embryo, the baby bird that is developing on the inside of that, to breathe and get oxygen and exchange carbon dioxide with the environment. And so modern birds, those pores are all around. And modern birds have a very interesting behavioral trait when they are incubating their eggs. They are constantly turning their eggs over. And so the gas exchange needs to be uniformly distributed across that egg. And so that's one trait in birds that we know is very different than dinosaurs, where they lay their eggs and they're pretty much left in that position until the babies hatch. Mm-hmm.
All right, amazing. Just all the little things you can learn about from the positioning of eggs and looking at things on such a small scale. Let's go ahead and get one more question from Bridges. If you're still there, there we go.
How many are related to dinosaurs?
Oh, and we can't hear you. I think you might be muted.
If owls are related to dinosaurs, does that mean some dinosaurs had night vision like owls?
Oh, interesting question.
Yeah, so the question is, did some dinosaurs have night vision? And this is a little tricky to figure out, but by looking at the shape and the size of the orbit, so that's the bones around the eyeball, usually animals with night vision tend to have bigger orbits. We can assume that some of them did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so dinosaurs, when you look at the size of many of their eyes in comparison to the rest of the features on their body, they have very big eyes, which actually allows for pupils to really dilate and let a lot of light into their eyes. And generally, animals that are able to dilate their pupils very, very widely are able to see in dim to dark areas because they're letting in so much light. So like you said, an owl has there are certain owl species that have pupils that are able to dilate more than any other animals that we see, and they just let in so much light. And so they have very good nocturnal vision and night vision. Mm-hmm. And we do see that in some dinosaurs. So yeah, we don't know because we can't study the cells on the inside of their eyes or anything, but we think so. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Very cool. Bridges Elementary, thank you so much for those questions. We're going to turn the dial now over to Bridgeport Elementary. If you would turn your camera and microphone on, we would love to get some questions from Bridgeport Elementary.
Good morning. What inspired you to study dinosaurs and birds?
Wow.
Go ahead.
That's a great question. Um, I've always been a fan of animals and their anatomy, so the sizes and the shapes of all their bones and their tissues. And then I'm also a very outdoorsy person, and I like to think about deep, deep time. So, how did the rocks that we see outside get here today? What might be preserved in those rocks? And all these clues allowed me to enter the field of paleontology, where I get to study all these things. I get to go outside. I get to study the forms of animals and how they relate to their environments. So I just love puzzles, and this is a big puzzle with a lot of clues.
And for me, it was very similar to what Emily is saying. I love being outside. I love hiking and walking in nature. But what inspired me to really work in a museum setting and work with specimens and what we can learn about evolutionary history from the things that we have in these collections. My first summer job in high school, I worked in a geology lab, a paleontologist's lab at a university in North Dakota. And I spent the summer pinning beetles and learning about beetle diversity. And so I took that love for collections and sort of married it with my interest in birds. And that's where I've ended up today.
Awesome. Great biographical question. It sounds like a common theme is being out in nature, being outdoors. Great. So let's get another question from Bridgeport. What else are you wondering?
How long ago did dinosaurs live?
Ooh, so this gets to the question of when was the first dinosaur around? So that was about 240 or 230 million years ago. We have a dinosaur called Eoraptor from Argentina, and that was the first dinosaur. So and since they're still alive today with birds, they've lived for the past 240 million years.
Amazing. All right. Excellent questions. Let's go ahead and keep getting questions from you, Bridgeport.
Have you seen patterns in the size of dinosaurs over time?
Do you see patterns in the size of dinosaurs over time? That was the question?
Yes.
Yes. So we do see a trend if you look at dinosaurs that were the direct ancestors of birds. There is a trend from large body size to much, much smaller body size over time. And that actually is even before the mass extinction that led to birds. And we know that because even for fossils, so scientists can actually look at the size of the bone cells that are found in fossil dinosaurs and in fossil birds. And from understanding how big a bone cell is, you get an idea as well of how large the genome of those birds were, the DNA that was inside. And so what we see is in birds, cell size starts getting smaller, the DNA gets smaller, and actually the animals are also getting smaller at the same time. And so there's this trend towards modern birds to almost miniaturization in that dinosaur lineage leading to birds.
Interesting. I wonder if that has anything to do with the trend towards losing teeth also. There's less room for teeth or something as they get smaller. I don't know. A wild hypothesis from myself. Let's go ahead and get another great question from Bridgeport.
How long have you been studying the connection of dinosaurs and birds?
Yeah, how long have you been studying the connection between birds and dinosaurs?
I've been a paleontologist for 9 years now. So 9 years for me.
And I have been working in ornithology since 1996. So that's a long time, I guess.
27
27
years.
Yeah, 20.
Give or take. Yeah, we're not giving exact numbers.
Exactly.
Great. Bridgeport Elementary, what's another question you're wondering?
How did the dinosaurs go extinct?
Ooh, this is a trick question of why the dinosaurs went extinct. So a lot of the dinosaurs went extinct, but of course we do have all these birds, which are dinosaurs. But I'm sure you're talking about the big dinosaurs that we generally think of, like this is Tyrannophonius, a relative of Tyrannosaur, and the Pseudoceratops. So those went extinct about 65 million years ago when a 6-mile wide asteroid came down off what's the coast of Mexico today. And this caused a lot of problems. It released a lot of dirt up into the atmosphere, which changed the amount of sunlight that was coming to the planet. And then it reduced the amount of plant life that could live. And then the animals that ate plants started to die off. And then the animals that ate them started to die off. So it's all a result of this giant asteroid that came from space. But it didn't get all of them.
It did not get all of them. And scientists believe that the birds that actually survived that asteroid, so impact, the dinosaurs that did, were the birds, and that they were probably very small. So most likely the size of a small chicken or smaller. And you have to imagine that if you are a giant Tyrannosaur, or Ceratops, so the amount of energy that you need to consume to maintain that big body of yours is a lot. And when your food starts to diminish because of the catastrophic circumstances of an asteroid impact on Earth, then those big-bodied animals are some of the first to blink out and go extinct. And so really it's the small guys that survived.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for your questions, Bridgeport and Bridges schools. Really appreciate those. We have a couple more from the chat to throw your way.
Great.
One question is about, let's see, how did the dinosaurs get so strong? Is there anything we learned from birds that gives us clues into that?
I mean, we could talk about the muscles that you see on the allosaur bone.
Yeah. So if we look at, I don't know if I can answer how they got so strong, but I can tell you the clues we use to know how strong they are. So if we look really closely at this shin bone of this allosaur here, there's all these stripes on it. If you see those, your bones have these too. They're much smaller, but these are where the muscles would attach to the bone. So there's a huge muscle that hugs on there. And based on the size and the shape of these, what they're called muscle scars, we can tell that these guys had pretty gigantic leg muscles and strong legs.
And so you kind of have to think as well about your body and how large the muscles that you use more often are. So if you're a gymnast, generally you're going to have a strong upper body and a strong lower body. If you're a soccer player, generally you've got really strong legs and maybe less strong arms than you would. And so birds and dinosaurs are the same way. It's how they use their muscles so that they have large areas for muscle attachment. And so this is the breastbone, of a shoebill stork, which flies. And you see this big part of the sternum. This is called the keel of a sternum. And so all birds have this keel, except for things like that ostrich behind me. But this provides a huge area for the very strong flight muscles, the breast muscles of a bird. And that area just allows for a very large muscle. And so that's how birds have powered flight, is because they're big flight muscles attached to this sternum. And so we know that they're strong in certain ways. So the turkey that is behind me, its legs are actually far stronger than its breast muscles because it mainly walks around or runs around on the ground. They very, very seldomly fly.
And the Allosaurus had a breast or furcula about probably the size of a banana, so that's not very big. So we know that it was using its muscles more for leg powering than for arm powering.
Mhm.
All right, awesome. And then this is a question that I'm sure a lot of people have been wondering. One person was bold enough to ask it. Can we use turkey DNA to bring back dinosaurs? Or if not turkey DNA, ostrich DNA, is there any way we can make that happen?
Well, unfortunately, we can't retroactively turn back evolution. So unfortunately, we can't take turkey DNA and create a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are so old that there's no DNA left in these bones or anything. And no matter what you've seen, you may have seen something like Jurassic Park, where there was dinosaur blood, right, stuck in a mosquito that bit a dinosaur over 65 million years ago. Well, there's no DNA in there either. So the amber is not preserving nucleic acids. So you may find a mosquito in there, but you're not going to get dinosaur DNA.
And as you've described, we do have dinosaurs. We don't need to go back and reconstruct them or anything.
Yes.
But we've got the descendants right here with us.
Yes. The big toothed ones, we will not be bringing them back.
It's safer that way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us up to the end of our program. So any last remarks from our scientists here out to those curious minds?
I just want to say, so because nature was such an inspiration for me growing up, it's all around you. I just encourage you to get out there, observe the dinosaurs around you today and the birds that are living among us.
And I'll echo that. Look at the rocks too, because there's fossils all around us too. And there's lots to see and find out there.
All right, awesome. So for all of you out there, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had a wonderful time, got some questions answered, and hopefully you have more questions that you will be exploring out there on your own time. If you had a good time with us today, please join us again next month on December 6th, when we will be having Dr. Peffer talk to us about how brains learn. So if you're interested in the brain science, then next month is right up your alley. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Great questions.